Thank you for coming. I'd like to introduce you to Pamela Olson, who graduated from Stanford in 2002 and then moved to Ramallah, West Bank, beginning in 2004, working as a journalist for the Palestine Monitor. There, she interviewed the first female elected mayor in the West Bank. She witnessed the 2005 disengagement from inside the Gaza Strip, and she served as foreign press secretary for Dr. Mustafa Barghouti's presidential campaign against Mahmoud Abbas in January of 2005, or June 2005, sorry. She later worked at the Institute for Defense Analyses in Washington, D.C., and she's currently writing a book on her travels and times in the West Bank titled Fast Times in Palestine. Please join me in welcoming Pamela Olson.
Hello, thank you again for coming. This is, as he said, a talk on sort of the modern Palestinian perspective. And here's a little map to sort of orient you to where we're talking about. Israel is right here, this little strip right here. And this is the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. They've been occupied since 1967. What this talk is not, it's not balanced. If I had enough time, I'd be very happy to go into the Israeli perspective. But for now, this is sort of the underrepresented perspective in this country. So I'm going to spend the time I have on this. It's not complete. I could talk all day about, Fatah versus Hamas and Likud versus Labor versus Kadima and all this, but and of course the recent violence in the Gaza Strip. But again, we don't have enough time. It's more just sort of, in my opinion, the bottleneck or a major bottleneck in the conflict is that a lot of Israelis and Americans don't understand the Palestinian context very well. But for people who do support Israel's security, it's very important information to have, I think. And I definitely encourage everyone to seek out the other side of the equation if you have the time and inclination. So the first half of the talk is about just kind of scenes from the West Bank. This is where I lived, Ramallah, which is about 10 miles north of Jerusalem, right there. This is the central traffic circle in Ramallah called Al-Manara. And as you can see, they have a Snickers poster over there. And there's another billboard for Coca-Cola that's been there for as many years as I've known the place on the other end. Another view of Ramallah sort of at sunset. And this is the main high school in the Palestinian territories is called the Friend School, and it was founded by Quakers in the late 1800s. And this is a view from one of the balconies of the Friend School. In Ramallah's main street at night. This is the Protestant church in Ramallah. It's next door to the offices where I worked at the Palestine Monitor. This is actually a friend of mine who's half Palestinian, grew up in Kentucky, actually speaks Arabic with a thick southern accent, and he married a woman from Bethlehem, and I was there last summer for the wedding. And this is a band that's playing at the French Cultural French Cultural Center in Ramallah, and it's all Palestinians except for Katie over here. She's an American woman who works for the one of the Palestinian Authority ministries. I don't remember which one. I think education, maybe. And this is the Ramallah Cultural Palace, venue financed by the UNDP and the Japanese government. And here's like a improv theater group kind of on the grounds, more of the grounds. When I took this picture, I didn't realize there was a public display of affection going on, but apparently there was. So this is the theater inside the venue, about 700 capacity. And I was there in 2005 when Daniel Barenboim conducted a mixed Arab and Israeli orchestra, did a Mozart piece and Beethoven's Fifth. Major event in Palestine and a nice bridging the divide moment. The Israeli musicians were interviewed for Haaretz, which is Israel's main newspaper, and talking about their experience is a really, really neat one. There's a magazine in the West Bank called This Week in Palestine, and which is actually monthly, so I don't know why it's called This Week in Palestine. But And they talk about the cultural events and museums and tourism and all kinds of things, political things as well. And they always have a picture in the back panel that's called Beautiful Palestine. And these are some of my favorites. One thing that I didn't realize before I went to Ramallah was that the West Bank has its own beer called Taibeh. And here's one of the billboards for it. It says, "Drink Palestinian, taste the revolution." And this is the village called Taibeh, which is a Christian village, sort of over a few hills from Ramallah, where they have a brewery. And here's a close-up of Taibeh. It's a very, very good beer. And this over here is kind of an outdoor cafe and public pool called Snowbar, which Snowbar means pine. And a nice place to spend a Sunday afternoon. Also, they had a film shoot there when I was there last time in 2007. Called Pomegranates and Myrrh is the movie. And this guy right here is actually a paid actor, and this guy who played the best man runs a restaurant on Ramallah's Main Street, and he's a character. He really was just running all over the place, trying to give autographs and stuff. It was a fun day. This is the main entertainment district of Ramallah, sort of a street going down toward Sangria's, which is the beer garden in Ramallah. Lovely place. I spent entirely too much time there. And now we're back to Main Street, Ramallah, where right in the central traffic circle, there's kind of a juice stand rivalry. So this is a Salati juice, which is just sort of a regular juicing machine, and you throw in a carrot and an apple and a pear or whatever, and make your juice. And this is Fruity Cocktail, which they have, peanuts and ice cream and maraschino cherries. So that's kind of the Main Street rivalry. This is Ziryab Coffee House, where I also spend way too much time. All the artwork on the walls is done by the owner, and there's a fireplace in the back there. And so in the winter, it's a nice place to drink some wine and hot cocoa. This is not affiliated with Starbucks in any way. But my guess is the Starbucks lawyers couldn't get through the checkpoints, so it stands as is. This is another bar called Zan, kind of the new one where I hung out. The major night spots kind of migrate in Ramallah. So one time it's Sangria's, then it's Zan, then it's this. So it was Zan in 2007. I went here for lunch a lot. Osama's Pizza. Osama's actually a Christian guy. And they have really nice Italian chicken sandwiches. And the other Italian restaurant in Ramallah is called Pronto. And me and John, the half Palestinian guy who speaks Arabic with a southern accent, we'd sit here for hours with cheesecake and wine and cappuccino and talk about politics and our love life. Palestinian Circus School is a new venture in the West Bank. It's and they do performances called Circus Behind the Wall. And sometimes they do sort of their own performances. This is in Zan, actually. There's kind of an arboretum, or anyway, an extension on the Zan bar, and they did this performance with, she's a visiting Italian circus artist, and these two brothers run the circus school. He's the manager, and he's the main trainer. And they also go around the West Bank to, this is in the Jenin refugee camp, teaching kids circus skills. And I tagged along with them once. This guy sells his sort of one-string guitars on Main Street. He's kind of a fixture. This is one of the murals along Main Street, which the symbology is that, these are the refugees from 1948. And this is the new generation sort of still struggling for their rights. Another mural, which is curious, I think. I'm pretty sure it's trying to express solidarity with, here's the Iraqi flag and a symbol of, resistance, and the Palestinian flag. And then Santa Claus, for some reason. Both a Christian and a Western icon, so I'm not sure. But interesting nonetheless. The ones in the corner, this is sort of the prom at the Friends School, the Quaker school, where my friend John, the guy from Kentucky, worked as a counselor, and some more pictures of Palestinian kids. The main restaurant, or sort of the most shishi restaurant in the West Bank, where like if Kofi Annan comes for a visit, they'll take him to Darna. And this is the entrance. This is their main dining room. North of Ramallah is the Muqatta, which is where Yasser Arafat used to live, now Mahmoud Abbas, or used to rule. These are the grounds in the Muqatta, which most of the time I was there, they were just completely covered with rubble and destroyed cars and that kind of thing. But it was all finally cleared out for Yasser Arafat's funeral in 2005, and now it's a nice open area again. A little north of that, there's the Plaza Mall in the town of El Biere, and they have behind it is a nice mosque. I live close to this, so I always heard the call to prayer 5 times a day. And a sign on the door, make sure that, you know, nothing funny happens. This is the major supermarket on the bottom floor. And on the top floor, there's a lot of boutique stores, super expensive, United Colors of Benetton, and something called Jawal Land, which is kind of a children's play area. And Jawal is Palestine's main cell phone company. And this is their brand new headquarters in Al Biere. They were building that when I was there. You know there had to be one. Again, not affiliated with the Western chain, but a nice hotel. This is Birzeit University, the top university in the West Bank. It's in a village a little bit north of Ramallah. And north of that is, I'm kind of going north in the West Bank, is a park called Aqua Viva, which has a pool and sort of four-wheelers for kids to ride around the hills in a little bit. This, as he mentioned, the first elected female mayor in the West Bank, in Palestine actually, Fatia al-Barghouthi, which Barghouthi, you hear that name a lot. In Palestine, it's a very common Palestinian surname. So it was lovely to see men making coffee for women for once, and I enjoyed that. Barbecues in the hills, a favorite pastime in the West Bank. This is a New Year's party at the Jericho Intercontinental. I've clearly had too much to drink, but it was right in the middle of the election season when Mustafa Barghouthi and Mahmoud Abbas were running for president, and we were all working on the campaign, so we needed a weekend pretty badly. My 25th birthday in my apartment in Ramallah. And all these guys are lawyers who work for the PLO, Negotiations Affairs Department. During sort of early attempts to negotiate, it was found that Yasser Arafat had, not even any maps, no sort of clear policy. So I think some European organizations sponsored some, high-powered Yale and Harvard lawyers of Arab background to square that away for the next time negotiations can hopefully take place. And they have travel documents to travel freely. So this is us hanging out in West Jerusalem. Obviously, as an American, I could travel much more freely than a lot of Palestinians. They have color-coded IDs. So they have no citizenship anywhere, but they have IDs, and they try to. Some of them can't leave their hometowns at all, or unless they get a permit, and permits can be very hard to find. So this is kind of an exception. When an American friend of mine came and visited me in the West Bank, he wanted to see Hebron. So this guy right here, his name is Hisham. He had applied to work for the Palestine Monitor, and the position had already been filled, but I gave him a call anyway, and he said, "Oh yeah, come on down." So he took us to, he toured us around the old city and took us to, this is a den above a refrigerator repair shop. It's kind of frowned on to drink alcohol in Hebron. It's kind of a conservative city. So they have their little upstairs den where they have, wine and their, communist posters. And of course they made us lunch. It's kind of a standing joke in Palestine. If you ask somebody for directions, they'll invite you to dinner. And this was no exception. There's farmers markets all over Palestine. These are, so this is Nablus, which is in the middle of the northern West Bank, right up here. Beautiful area, really rich agricultural, and there's ruins from the Crusader era. And this actually is a Samaritan village that's overlooking Nablus. And the people there identify as Arabs, but they pray in Hebrew. So they're kind of a bridge between, they get along with the Israelis and with the Arabs. So it's kind of a nice existence theorem, I guess. The coexistence could happen. And this building right here is a fancy mansion built by the wealthiest Palestinian in the world of Italian marble. And the first time I saw it, I was like, what on earth is going on up there? But it's a mansion. In Nablus, there's also the Church of Jacob's Well. And sort of, because Nablus, like all Palestinian cities, is surrounded by checkpoints, it's very difficult for Christian pilgrims to get to this area. So when you go, you kind of have it to yourself, which is nice and also kind of sad. But beautiful church, and the well is really cool. In a village north of Nablus, there's a restaurant. There's a village called Bethlehem, and they have a restaurant built into the side of a hill where there's a big spring. So there's about 5 waterfalls in this restaurant, and grapevines overhead, and sort of tree canopies down below. It's a beautiful place to spend time as well. This is a Al Yasmin Hotel in Nablus. Typical Arabic food. And they have a little stained glass medallion with a gunshot hole right in the middle of the mosque. This is a village near Nablus called Salim, and just pretty landscapes up there. Jayus village is right north of Qalandia, so it's right in this area. And it's a town of about 3,000, which my hometown of Stigler, Oklahoma, is also about 3,000. And so it's kind of my home away from home in the West Bank. It was the first place I went when I traveled there, and I spent a lot of time there. These guys are 2 brothers that are really good friends of mine, and their father, some of their nephews. And I always look forward to olive harvest time when I was there, some of their land. Kind of a Jayus house party. This little guy's named Osama. He's pretty adorable. So yeah, olive harvest every year is kind of a big party. Everyone gets together, harvests together, makes jokes, chats for hours. And the big payoff is the picnic. Usually some women will bring down, big buckets of really, really lovely homemade food. So it's a good time. But unfortunately, more often than not, at some point, Israeli soldiers will, come and ask us what we're doing and what's our business and all this, and on Palestinian land. So it's kind of a mixed feeling these days. And so now the second half of the talk is more about the actual occupation, and just sort of scenes of destruction around Nablus. This was the administrative headquarters of the police, and the sort of town hall. It was destroyed by the Israeli army in 2002. Another scene from a checkpoint, a tank rolling in. More sort of typical, the kind of things you see on the news about what's happening in Palestine. So one thing that a lot of people don't understand is the extent of settlements, checkpoints, and what the wall does to people in the West Bank. So I'll explain that a little bit. This was a Qalandia checkpoint, the main crossing point between the West Bank and Jerusalem. A really long wait, and that's if it's open. If it's not open, you can't exit the West Bank at all. And in the West Bank, there are more than 600 checkpoints and roadblocks. And most of them are actually within the West Bank, not on the borders with Israel, as most people assume. They're all, scattered throughout, mostly to protect the settlements, which I'll get to that in a minute. And for example, Nablus is surrounded by 16 checkpoints, and if you can't get through, you have to hike over these mountains, which takes about 2 hours, and you run the risk of being arrested or shot if an Israeli soldier sees you trying to bypass the checkpoint. It's actually a very lovely walk if you're not worried about sniper fire, but it's a problem for that reason, especially if you have someone needs to get to the hospital or a teacher trying to get to his job. It can be a big, hassle or simply impossible. And the settlements, there's about 130 sort of authorized Israeli settlements in the West Bank. They're all illegal under international law because it's a transfer of civilian population into occupied territory. But there's 130 of those, and then 100 unauthorized outposts, which means that even under Israeli law, they're not legal. But they sort of get tacit approval and sometimes ex post facto approval, and a lot of them get roads and electricity built by the Israeli government. So, and this is one of the settlements called Psagot, which is, as you can see, like all this down here is Ramallah, and this is Psagot settlements. It's sort of overlooking the whole thing. This is Nablus down here, and Elon Morey settlement up here. This is one of the settlements around Jerusalem. I forget what it's called, but they took a forested hilltop and turned it into this, and it's for Israelis only. Like Palestinians can't even access it, much less live there. And a friend and I visited the Elon Morey settlement, and I asked this guy who's a settler leader, like, what do you think about when you look down and you see all the Palestinians living there? And he said, and I said, what do you think should be done? And he said, well, I think they can stay here as long as they keep to their areas and leave us alone. And I said, you mean like an Indian reservation? And he said, exactly, like an Indian reservation. That's what we should do. So that's kind of a, and that's one of the milder things I've heard a settler say. So here's a map of the West Bank. These are all the Palestinian built-up areas. This is Israeli West Jerusalem, and this is East Jerusalem, which Israel has annexed all of this in 1980 in contravention of international law. Even the United States doesn't build its embassy in Jerusalem because it's still kind of not quite legal status. And then here are all the settlements, all these blue things. So it's like this. There's they really sort of Swiss cheese through the West Bank, and there's also roads that connect all the settlements and that Palestinians can't use. So it's a big, it really splits the West Bank up, and a lot of the checkpoints. The point is to, keep Palestinians separate from the settlers. And these are just various phases of the wall that Israel is building. They say to stop suicide bombers, which it's hard to say whether the building of the wall has actually resulted in the lessening of terrorism since 2005. The wall's still not completed, and illegal workers from the Palestinian territory is still going to Israel regularly. So if people really want a suicide bomb, basically they can. But Palestinians would prefer not to have a wall. But if there is a wall, they say, fine, but build it on Israeli land, not Palestinian land. But as you can see, it winds all the way all around Palestinian areas. And this is what the wall looks like in urban areas. It's a 20 to 30 foot tall concrete structure. This is my friend Anna, a Dutch anthropologist, standing on the wall in the Jerusalem area. Here's kind of a before and after shot of what the wall looks like in Jerusalem. And a lot of them go right down the middle of Palestinian neighborhoods, sort of, on this side is stuff Israel wants to annex, and on this side is what they're thinking to leave for the Palestinians. So here's this again is Jerusalem. Israeli West Jerusalem's here, and East Jerusalem is here. And all these gray areas are Palestinian built-up areas. And here's the settlements that are trying to encircle, East Jerusalem so that Israel can annex as much as possible. And there's another settlement here that's not shown for some reason, but there's a big one there as well. And here's where the wall is being built, just sort of the different sections of it. And here's all the checkpoints. And so this basically, all of this is what the Israeli government is trying to annex with the wall. And it really kind of cuts Palestinians off from their capital, East Jerusalem, and also from, it cuts the East and West Bank it cuts the West Bank in northern and southern part. So there's 70 kilometers of wall in the East Jerusalem area, and it cuts about 250,000 Palestinians away from the West Bank, which means either they have to sort of renounce some of their West Bank identity and their ties to family and friends and universities, or they have to sort of take themselves away from East Jerusalem and live in the West Bank. So it's a terrible choice for a lot of people. Bethlehem has something similar being done to it. This is Bethlehem, just south of Jerusalem. This is the Church of the Nativity, the modern wing of the church. And this is Manger Square in Bethlehem during Christmas a few years ago. So here's what's going on in Bethlehem. This is the gray areas again, are Palestinian built-up areas. These are villages. And the blue areas are settlements. And here's all the checkpoints that surround Bethlehem. Make it difficult for people to get around. And again, the sections of the wall being built and all of this area. First of all, Bethlehem is being separated from Jerusalem, which is, for centuries has been, for millennia actually, has been a sister holy city to Jerusalem with a lot of, Christian and Muslim and Jewish holy sites that, people went through freely. But now, for example, if you want to do the Palm Sunday procession from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, it's impossible. You can't get past the wall. So it's a big, and Bethlehem's almost a ghost town now in a lot of areas because tourists can't get in and people can't get out. Another shot of the wall around Jerusalem. It's become a major canvas for graffiti, which is kind of a silver lining. Here's a Gandhi portrait and Control-Alt-Delete. And the Friends School, again, they crafted a holiday message on the wall. So now there's a special case in a town called Qalandia, which is right here. As you can see, the wall surrounds it almost totally. And there's one entrance point, which is controlled by an Israeli checkpoint, basically rendering it a ghetto because it's isolated from its land, it's isolated from the rest of the West Bank, it's isolated from the world. 40,000 Palestinians sort of trapped in this open-air prison. And, for example, somebody from Habla or Ras Hatiyah, if they want to go to Qalandia to go to the hospital, used to it was, a very short hike. Now they have to go all the way around here through so many checkpoints and then take this road and then past the last checkpoint to get to the hospital. And it's same with Jayus. People who go to university in Qalandia have to go all the way around, and it's a big hassle. And as you can see, these settlements are only this big and they're taking this much land. So it's, you can see why the residents are pretty upset. This is central Qalandia, just a picture from inside. It's an American friend of mine who came to visit, outskirts of Qalandia, and this is sort of what it looks like next to the wall. There's a thin strip of farmland that's left to the residents, and then just totally surrounded by the wall and the sniper towers, and you can't even really watch the sunset anymore. And it's kind of a nightmare. And then here's a Israeli highway going along where the border, the wall around Qalandia is. Kind of out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. And in the Jenin, Tulkarem, and Qalandia, kind of the northern West Bank areas, about 3,000 kids, as a direct result of the wall, couldn't finish their education. And of course, more have been enabled because of checkpoints and other problems. And so in urban areas, it's a concrete wall. In rural areas, it's an electrified fence with army access roads on both sides of it and trenches sort of bordering it, and then piles of razor wire. So it's a huge, huge scar on the landscape. If you approach the fence without authorization, you can be shot on sight, and it's happened before. And the Israeli army, they've isolated a lot of farmland from Palestinians, but they try to say, oh, but we made gates and we let them access the farmland, it's fine. But as you can see here, it's kind of a joke. It's really difficult for farmers to get exactly where they need to be, exactly the right time. And even if they do, they still have to have an Israeli permit, which can be very difficult or impossible to get. And even if they have a permit and they're on time, the soldiers might not show up. This has happened while I've been there. I mean, people with permits have been turned back or the soldiers haven't showed up. So it's a another big hassle. Here's some kids trying to get through a gate to get to school. Like I said, the permit system is pretty hard to get around. In JUs, for example, I think fewer than a third of the farmers are allowed access to their land. And even if they're allowed access, they can't hire a worker to help them. And so it's you can see the city deteriorating as you go every year because fewer and fewer people can access their source of livelihood. Here's another picture of JUs, and as you can see, just right below it, there's the fence, even though the green line is that the border with Israel is 4 kilometers away, and all of this land, and there's more. This is just some of the land, but all of this land is JU's land that's been isolated by this wall. Greenhouses, citrus trees, almond trees, olive trees, and also importantly, all seven of JU's water wells and their main above-ground reservoir. Here's pictures of farmers trying to get through the wall to their land being checked. This is another case of, this is the mayor of JU's, Fayez, and his son Mohammed, and they, sometimes they get harassed or driven off their land while they're trying to work. This is a view of, the Israeli government likes to say, oh, it's just a fence, it can be torn down easily, it's no big deal. But this is an example of what fence construction can look like. This whole mountainside has been totally destroyed, just right next to JU's land. And this is kind of a close-up where 13 of this family's 20 olive trees were destroyed in this area. Other families, they've lost hundreds of trees. And in December of 2004, the Israeli army bulldozed 650 more olive trees to build a new settlement on JU's land called Zufim North. At that time, there was a rally that developed with Israeli and Palestinian peace activists. And this guy, Yuri Abneri, he was about 85 years old. He was a former member of Israel's Knesset, or parliament, and he was actually a member of a pre-Israeli state militia called the Irgun. Since then, he's become a peace activist. And he said 2 years ago, when the fence was built here, we had a hard time convincing people in Israel that the fence was erected for political and settlement purposes. First, they separated the people of JU's from their land, preventing them from working on it. And now everything is clearly visible. They are passing the land to settler possession. So this kind of caper is happening all over the West Bank. And just this week, right now, information has come to light that a settlement in the Bethlehem area has new growth approved. So even while people are talking about hopes for peace, the settlements are still expanding all over the West Bank. More pictures of the wall. And I think the wall is an example of collective punishment, which is not legal under international law. There's a lot of cases of that. Now here's Hebron. Hebron is in the southern West Bank, and it has a whole story of its own. Here are some photographs of Hebron around the old city. In 1997, the Israeli government sort of took over the H2 area of Hebron, where 30,000 Palestinians lived and 500 Israeli settlers lived. And you can see this includes the entire old city and the Ibrahimi Mosque / Cave of the Patriarchs, which is a very important holy site for both Muslims and Jews. And now only a few thousand Palestinians are left because of settler harassment, because of difficulty in moving, because of difficulty in getting goods and services in and out. And here's the settlements where the settlers live. It's 500 settlers protected by 2,000 Israeli soldiers. And in parts of the old city, the settlers live right above the Palestinians. And they have to have chicken wire over the thing because the settlers tend to throw garbage and rocks and stuff at the Palestinians as they're going past. A Jewish friend and I visited this area, and he almost had settler slop water poured on his head while he was walking. This is a typical Hebron street in the Palestinian area in H1. And this is what it looks like in H2, a similar street. Totally shut down, totally cleansed of Palestinians. And patrolled by Israeli soldiers to make sure that none of the Palestinians can find a way to resist this. Very, very eerie vibe, very eerie place. This is some of the examples of graffiti in Hebron done by the settlers. This one is just because I don't think there's anything sadder than an unfunctioning Turkish bath, but that's the case. JDL is the Jewish Defense League. This is some of their work. And I mean, not only here's a picture of settlers harassing Palestinians while soldiers basically watch. The soldiers themselves sometimes cause problems for Palestinians. And this is my boss, Mustafa Barghouti. When he was running for president in 2005, he was, he had to campaign for president, so he wanted to travel as much as possible. But he was barred from entering the Hebron Old City. He was arrested twice. He was beaten once at a checkpoint along with his entourage. And he was allowed into the Gaza Strip, where about a third of Palestinian voters reside. But his driver, his campaign manager, and the rest of his retinue were denied. So he was just kind of on his own there. And this is the kind of restrictions that a presidential candidate, faces. And you can imagine what it's like for ordinary Palestinians. The Gaza Strip is a different story. It's cut off. It's isolated from the West Bank, already surrounded by a wall. And the checkpoint to get in is about a kilometer-long tunnel once you pass the checkpoint, and there's electric gates inside, and you can get sort of trapped between gates, and it's a big hassle. But I was actually surprised when I visited Gaza that there are still some pretty areas left. I mean, this is the northern Gaza Strip. It's pretty, the harbor in Gaza City, although the fishing boats can't go very far out into the water because Israeli ships patrol it, and if they go past a certain limit, they can get shot at, and it's happened a lot as well. There's a school in central Gaza Strip, and sort of a town square in central Gaza Strip. But there's also large areas that are totally devastated by the Israeli government that I visited. And I'm standing on a rooftop here in Rafah, which is in the southern Gaza Strip, just across. There's a border with Israel, with Egypt nearby. And these are just all pictures taken from this one rooftop. And here, so the Israeli government has destroyed about 18,000 Palestinian homes since 1967. The majority for administrative reasons, which means they were built without a permit, but it's very difficult for Palestinians to get permits, especially in the sort of areas that Israel would prefer to annex for the settlements. The second is clearing operations, which means, the areas are too close to a border or too close to a settlement or something. So this is an example of the second kind, a clearing operation. As you can see, all these neighborhoods along the border with Egypt have been totally wiped out. And I was kind of on the border there when I was taking these pictures of where this is happening. And by the way, the third type is punitive, which means if a suicide bomber blows himself up in Israel, then his family's home often gets demolished. So this is, again, I'm on the roof again of the house in Rafah. And these are some of the homes that are partially destroyed, and families are still living there because they have nowhere else to go. It's a very crowded area. You can see the water tank and the laundry, which means people are still trying to live here. And kids playing on sort of a 45-degree angle house. This is, again, my friend John, the half Palestinian from Kentucky. And this is one of his students at the Friends School. And his family lives in this house in the Gaza Strip, which the Israeli army occupied because it overlooks a settlement. This is a settlement area. It used to be. It was destroyed in 2005. But because it overlooked it, it was occupied by Israeli soldiers for 5 years. And Israeli soldiers lived on, or took over the top 3 floors, and the family was forced to live on sort of half of the bottom floor. And the reason they didn't leave is because they knew if they did, the house would be demolished. So they sort of bore up under the situation for 5 years. And one time a UN convoy came to check up on the situation, And as they were leaving and Yusuf walked out and was waving goodbye to them, one of the soldiers shot him in the back. And he survived, luckily, but the bullet is still in his, lodged in his spine. So if he, if he doesn't too vigorous activities, he's afraid, everyone's afraid it might damage his nerves. So he's kind of fragile after that. His sister crafted this message out of spent Israeli shells in their yard. And this is Palestinians in the disengagement in 2005. When the settlements were gone, finally people could visit the beaches because the beaches had been taken over by the settlers. So a lot of these kids, if they're under 5 years old, had never seen the sea at all. So this is, for many of them, their first time to swim in the ocean. Since the Second Intifada began in September 2000, about 1,100 Israelis, including 123 children, have been killed. And it's difficult to find reliable statistics for the Palestinians because some Palestinian organizations count suicide bombers among the casualties, which isn't really fair. And some Israeli, numbers don't count, for example, Palestinians who've died due to denial of medical treatment from the checkpoint to the wall. So it's kind of hard. So these numbers are basically a floor. I went with the Israeli numbers, and these are basically a floor, like the minimum number of Palestinians killed. It's actually probably maybe 10, 15% higher, I would guess. But these are just 3 stories of children who've been shot by Israeli snipers. This one, Iman al-Hams, was on her way to school when she wandered into a closed military area in the Gaza Strip, which these areas aren't really marked. It's just kind of, it's easy to stumble on them and not realize it. And one of the soldiers shot her and then walked up to her and shot her twice in the head to confirm the kill, and then put his gun on automatic and shot her about 12 more times. And this was what happened was his fellow soldiers were so horrified that they told Israeli television about the incident and leaked the transcript of what the watchtower was saying and what Captain R, who was the person who shot him, who shot her. So this was the transcript that was leaked. Captain R makes it clear, I and another soldier are going in a little closer, a little forward to confirm the kill, receive a situation report, we fired and killed her, I'll confirm the kill, over. Anything moving in the zone, even a 3-year-old, needs to be killed. And I hasten to add that this is not an indictment of the Israeli people by any means. I should mention first that Captain R was cleared of all charges a year later. He was charged with, mostly Israeli soldiers who kill Palestinians aren't charged with anything. But in this case, he was charged with illegal use of weapons, conduct unbecoming an officer, and obstruction of justice. And a year later, he was cleared of these. But I'm sure all of you are familiar with the case of Abu Ghraib, and probably most are familiar with the Stanford prison experiment. And pretty much any time you have one group of people having almost complete power over another and very slippery legal leeway, these kind of horrific situations are often not far behind. And this one, Ragda, she was sitting in a UN classroom, just in the middle class, and a bullet came in and entered under her eye and exited the back of her head, and she died pretty quickly after that. Ghadir was killed by a shot to the stomach in a similar incident about a month later. And the UN issued a press release saying, that this can't go on. A place where fire is so indiscriminate that it makes school, dangerous for children is unacceptable. But that's The Independent, I believe, in Britain, quoted Israeli soldiers as admitting, Gaza Strip's pretty much a free fire zone. It's I think a playground for sharpshooters was the word they used. Israel engages in targeted assassinations, and these are the numbers I'm least sure of because I couldn't find like a rock solid source. But I know these are close, like certainly within a couple hundred. About a third innocent bystanders. And I mean, as for the children killed, I can name 8 off the top of my head in just the course of one assassination. So I wouldn't be surprised at all by these numbers. And these numbers I'm fairly certain of. As of mid-2005, more bystanders than targets had been killed by Israeli assassinations, which are, by the way, illegal under international law because obviously there's no chance of a fair trial. It's kind of judge, jury, and executioner. And there's not necessarily really good oversight of who gets put on the list to be assassinated. Women's health statistics are pretty horrific. About 50 Palestinian women have been forced to give birth at checkpoints. Nearly half the babies died. It's much harder to get, prenatal care, postnatal care, more stillbirths. Here's some examples of people who've died due to lack of medical treatment. This guy is an Palestinian AP journalist, and his daughter died because the ambulance couldn't get to her. She was 21 years old, and she's a dialysis patient. She needed to get to the hospital for dialysis, and they wouldn't let her leave the Gaza Strip, so she died as well. Since '67, about 650,000 Palestinians have been through the Israeli prison system, which amounts to about 40% of the adult male population. So this is definitely an issue that affects virtually everyone. Right now there's about 8,000 who are being held. 550 are held in administrative detention, which means they're held without charge or trial for up to 3 months, and the 3-month sentences can be renewed indefinitely. So it's kind of an Abu Ghraib type thing, not Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo type thing, where if everybody knows you can disappear indefinitely with no charge or trial, and it's a threat hanging over everybody. Here's an example. I think this is in Hebron, a kid being harassed by soldiers. Here's another detainee. And sometimes they'll come into town and just arrest all the young men between 16 and 40 and detain them for a while. There's stories to go with these pictures, but I think we're running low on time. So everyone hears about the violent resistance of Palestinians. It's what makes the news. But few people know how much nonviolent resistance goes on all the time. It just gets ignored because of, the overarching, if it bleeds, it leads. And if somebody's just marching down Main Street demanding something, it's pretty easy to ignore that. These are just a few of the nonviolent organizations that work. Combatants Repeat. Almost all of these are joint Israeli-Palestinian projects. So there's really a lot of good things going on, but they just get so hopelessly overshadowed by the violence and the political situation. This is a Belain village. It's west of Ramallah, right in this area, and as you can see, the wall is taking a lot of this land away. And so every Friday at noon, Palestinian, international, and Israeli peace activists gather and protest. And it's, the protests haven't done a lot of good, but it's a nice time to sort of everyone, get together and a feeling of solidarity that this, this isn't right. It's not a way to peace. And I went to the protest once just to take notes and write an article about it because since I lived there, I wasn't just sort of coming in for a month to do activism. I really didn't want to get arrested because there's a good chance I'd be deported. So I was hanging in the back, just taking notes. And there were people in front of it kind of getting roughed up and, tear gas flying everywhere. And all of a sudden, unprovoked, soldiers started shooting things in my direction, like there's the rear guard people. So I turned around and ran, and something hit me in the back of the leg. And, you don't know what it is. It could be anything. It could be a real grenade. It could be a flashbang grenade. It could be a tear gas canister. And I didn't know. So it was a moment of sort of like, what's going to happen next. And I didn't even hear the explosion because I guess the adrenaline was blocking that neural pathway or something. But I knew it had exploded because I was partially deaf for several hours. But it turned out, luckily, to be a flashbang grenade, which they make a big noise and they throw a little fireball, but they don't throw shrapnel. So had a nasty bruise, but I was fine. But that's the kind of thing that happens when you try to engage in nonviolent resistance. Another example is in May of 2004. There was a big demonstration in Rafah against an earlier a lot of people from Rafah were killed in an Israeli incursion, and there was a demonstration against that a few days later, and an Israeli helicopter shot a missile into the demonstration. They claimed later that they had been aiming at an empty building just to scare the demonstrators, but this seems like a pretty hollow excuse, given that, anyone who shoots a missile anywhere near a group of civilians is asking for trouble. Here's some of the aftermath. And what a lot of people find hard to understand when they hear about all this is, what's America doing about it? And the answer is total backing of Israel. And here's a few examples of quotes from congressmen. Here's my guy from Oklahoma, because God said so. That's his take on it. Tom DeLay, I don't see occupied territory, I see Israel. But it goes on both sides of the aisles. The Democrats are the same as Republicans basically on this issue. Here's Barack Obama, continue our unique defense relationship with Israel, fully fund military assistance. Hillary Clinton, same thing. And in fact, 27% of all of America's foreign aid goes to Israel, while the Israelis only make up, 1/10 of 1% of the world's population, which is, it's a strange thing. Just on the face of it. We're giving, and this is just for military grants, $5.5 million every day to Israel, as well as full political backing. And again, this is probably a little more than half of all the aid that goes to Israel, but this is just a military aid. The U.S. has single-handedly vetoed 41 resolutions requesting that Israel obey international laws and treaties. As you can see, 13-1, 13-1, 14. The one is always America, vetoing all these resolutions. Why is America supporting Israel? It's very complex. I wish I could go into the whole long relationship, but the short answer is that for now, the America-Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, is the second most powerful lobby in America. And while they certainly don't make American foreign policy, they do make it very hard for people to debate the foreign policy. Like when I was living in Washington, there's so many roadblocks and so much censorship and self-censorship about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's like it's a huge taboo. Very, very strange situation, but it makes it very difficult to have civil discussion about this. And something I heard a lot of Palestinians say is that, we like to believe that the West is a beacon of democracy and freedom and all these things, but then when we see what happens to us and we see the response to it, it's very hard for us to have faith in the West and to have faith in democracy. So they say the silence of the West is worse than the bullets of the Israelis. The good news is that I think, and I think an increasing number of people are beginning to realize that Israeli and Palestinian security depend on each other. Like, you can't have one without the other. So as Ami Ayalon, who was commander of the Israeli Navy, former head of the Shin Bet, which is the Israeli Internal Security Service, they came out against the wall, against the fence, and against the assassinations and all these sort of really harsh measures, because he says the more Palestinian territory that we are annexing by building this fence, the more violence we shall see in the future. I'm not saying this because I love Palestinians. I don't care about Palestinians, but I care about Israel and the way I understand Israel should be. And if we're controlling 2 million Palestinians in the West Bank, he says in all of his experience of fighting terror, there's less terrorism when Palestinians have hope for a state. And unless that hope is created, we're not going to have security no matter how high we build a wall or how deep we build a trench. So what's the solution? First of all, there's sort of the initial work towards peace talks. First step, obviously, should be a comprehensive ceasefire, including stopping all settlement expansion, allow adequate humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. People are also increasingly coming to realize we have to talk to Hamas, give them a genuine chance to moderate or fail. They've expressed willingness to let Abbas negotiate and abide by a peace deal if it passes a Palestinian referendum. So we should see if they're serious about that instead of assuming they're not and sanctioning them and totally making it impossible for them to do anything. And maybe in the course of a year, the 100 unauthorized outposts, it's a no-brainer. They need to be dismantled. So it can be a huge show of good faith for Israel to dismantle these while the Palestinians make sure there's no suicide bombings, no rockets, none of this. That could be a workable situation for peace, to allow talks. Most important thing is peace. The peace deal has to be based on international law, not on the fact that Israel has more power than the Palestinians. Because, the Palestinians, they know what their rights are, and they know that if they don't, they know they have a right to resist as long as international law is not followed. And it's kind of a gray area once they have their rights under international law, then if they still resist, then it's clear cut that they're the ones in the wrong. But until then, there's a big gray area. And what about a final peace deal? In 2002, the governments of the entire Arab world came together and offered Israel peace and recognition based if they will withdraw to the 1967 borders, which means allow the West Bank and Gaza for a Palestinian state, have West Jerusalem for Israel's capital and East Jerusalem for Palestinian capital, with some possible swaps here and there. And the rights of refugees to return are enshrined in international law. They're not negotiable. They have to be acknowledged. But the implementation of the right will probably be a negotiated mixture of a limited number who are repatriated into Israel, a larger number repatriated to the West Bank and Gaza, and the rest, given reparations for their lost property. So far, the Israeli government isn't satisfied. They want security before they negotiate, but it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, because until there's good faith negotiation on the table, there's a good chance they will not have security. If the two-state solution is not implemented in a reasonable amount of time, Israel basically has to choose two things: either all the land between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, majority Jewish rule, and peace. If they keep all the land, but don't allow a Palestinian state, then what we have is apartheid, because you have a minority, soon to be a minority Jewish population between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, ruling over a majority Arab population. Second alternative is Jewish democracy and peace, which means the fair two-state solution. If they want all the land and peace, a lot of people right now are moving toward the idea that, okay, the two-state solution is dead, Israel will not allow it, so what's next is a anti-apartheid struggle between the Jordan and the Mediterranean and an eventual one-state solution. Most Palestinians have nothing against a one-state solution. It's really the Israelis who still want to have a Jewish democracy rather than a shared democracy. So they oppose the one-state solution, but it's like you got to pick one. You got to be serious. I can't stress enough, this is the tip of the iceberg of what's going on over there and all the issues surrounding it. And if you want to read more, I'm writing a book called Fast Times in Palestine. And for more information or to get in touch with me, which you're very welcome to, my website is pamolson.org. That will tell you a lot more about it. So that's my talk, and I'm open for questions. Yep.
You referenced it in the last slide, but what exactly are the demographics with the Israelis and the Palestinians?
So there's, in Israel proper, there's about 5 million Jews, about 1 million Arab Israelis, or Palestinians who were left over from 1948. And then in the West Bank and Gaza, there are about 4 million Palestinians. So Jews are kind of roughly a bare majority still, but it's changed. I mean, Arabs have a much higher birth rate, so it's rapidly moving in that direction. Yeah.
What are the Palestinian attitudes towards Jordan and Egypt and the occupation between 48 and 67?
Well, as for Jordan and Egypt, Egypt, they're pretty angry. I mean, not at Egypt, but at Mubarak, because he also, like Israel, gets a lot of foreign aid from America, and a lot of that foreign aid goes to repressing his own population, who aren't so happy about some of his policies, both his internal policies and his foreign policies. In the recent violence in Gaza, he basically tacitly supported Israel, and this makes people in Egypt as well as in the Palestinian territories furious. They just think of him as a total sellout and a dictator. Jordan's a little more complicated. They also get a lot of foreign aid, and they also have a close relationship with the West. Even with the Iraq War, they kind of were forced to tacitly support it, even though not out loud. Forced to take in a lot of Iraqi refugees. So the King of Jordan knows that he can't cross America too strongly, because the aid gets cut off, and there's many other ways America can make his life difficult. But he's trying really hard to skate that line, but it's a nearly impossible situation. What was your other question?
What do Palestinian people think about being occupied by Arab neighbors?
Between 48 and 60. Okay, I see. So that's right. After the 48 war, Jordan occupied the West Bank, and Egypt occupied the Gaza Strip. And the Palestinians at this point, at 48, it was not long after 36, which is the Palestinian Arab Revolt. And they were largely stripped of their arms and leaders. They were fighting against British occupation at that point. So they were, scattered. They had no leaders. They had no arms. And they weren't thrilled to be occupied by Egypt and Jordan, but they didn't really fight it. They didn't really have the means. They just sort of... but again, Jordanians and Egyptians are much closer to Palestinian culture, and they I'm sure they caused problems, but there certainly weren't all the checkpoints. There wasn't the wall. There wasn't people being kicked off their land. So it's a similar but also different situation. Yeah.
I know you said at the outset that you weren't presenting a balanced view and that this is the Palestinian perspective, which is important for us to know. But I'm a little concerned about the way you've portrayed the potential peace issue, because it sounds to me like you're saying that Israel is the block to peace, and I don't see it that way. Hamas has as one of its basic tenets the destruction of Israel. They don't recognize Israel as a nation and don't believe that they have any right to be there.
Right.
And they continue, they breached the ceasefire. I mean, both sides did. But they continue to rain rockets down. That's not a ceasefire. So how do you negotiate peace with an organization?
Okay, several things. First of all, as for the ceasefire, that's a pretty simple one. Israel's part of the ceasefire was to allow humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip in exchange for ceasing the rocket fire. The rocket fire ceased. The humanitarian aid was at about 20%, but it wasn't nearly enough. So the Hamas is already like, okay, they're already kind of breaking the ceasefire. And then on November 4th, while America, I mean, myself, I pay attention to this, and I didn't notice because I was thinking about the elections. The Israeli army killed 6 Hamas members in the Gaza Strip. So Hamas says, okay, all bets are off. I mean, it wasn't good faith in the first place, and now this is a clear violation. So that's when the rockets started first. And then after the ceasefire expired, then again, the Hamas is like, okay, you never allowed enough humanitarian aid in. You've violated the terms of the ceasefire, so they violated them as well. As for Hamas believing Israel has no right to exist, the PLO didn't change its charter until about 1988. And, you know, the charter also didn't agree that Israel should exist. So basically, the point here is you don't talk to your friends, you talk to your enemies. So one thing that Hamas has as some of its leverage, which has very little leverage, I mean, let's be honest, the rockets are kind of, I mean, they have a 0.1% kill rate, which is still terrible. I mean, one death is too many, but it's really not that much leverage if you think about it. But one thing they do have leverage is, look, if you know, negotiate a fair deal, then we can, you know, think about recognizing Israel's right to exist. And another of the arguments is, like, you know, who says who has a right to exist? I mean, you know, did the Native Americans have to sign a paper saying America has a right to exist in America? Did Aborigines in Australia say the Australians had a right to make a country on our land and, you know, move us off and all this kind of thing? No, they didn't, because the right almost doesn't matter. What matters is that it does exist, and Hamas understands that there's very little they can do. To save face, one thing they could do is have a ceasefire for 50 years, which they've expressed willingness to do. And you know, by the time 50 years have passed, it's going to be irrelevant what they think, honestly. They'll probably be disarmed by then. They might not exist by then. But for them to say, yes, Israel had a right to come to our land in 1948 and, you know, kick 750,000 Palestinians off their land, it's a tough pill for Palestinians to swallow. I mean, I think recognition of Israel's existence should be enough. Recognizing its right to exist might be, you know, that's difficult, and it's especially difficult to do before negotiations even begin. So this is one thing Hamas says is, like, you know, we're not going to give up all our leverage before we even start talking. So, yeah.
Comment and then a question. I guess the last question there was made the assumption that Hamas controls everybody there. I think it's probably pretty fractured, especially with communication and how segmented all the different peoples are over there. So that's also an issue for Hamas to be able to control all Palestinians.
Let me address that. For sure, Hamas doesn't control everybody. Even in the 2006, you know, landslide elections, they actually won 44% of the popular vote compared to Fatah's 40%. And it only looked like a landslide because Fatah was foolish and they split their own votes in a lot of provinces. So you ended up with Hamas taking way more seats than they should have based on voting percentage. But Hamas doesn't control everybody by any means, but Hamas and Fatah together, if they could form a unity government, which they've tried several times and been thwarted by various international shenanigans, but if they did, then, you know, Fatah has basically, you know, aligned to the West, and Hamas has pretty good security control in its areas. So taken together, this could be a promising mix.
And then the question. So I see probably the major problem actually isn't Israel against peace. It seems like it's the U.S., especially in you know, with its UN Security Council vetoing. What I do see, like internationally, you see just huge outcry of support for the Palestinians. It's not the same here in the U.S.
Right.
So what I have seen lately, though, in the past couple of years, is more and more awareness of what's going on over there. Do you think that educating more within the U.S., trying to sway public opinion towards a more balanced approach in Israel and Gaza Strip is the way to go, and how else can we help get that out?
Well, I think educating people is an excellent avenue, as I'm trying to do here and with my book. Certainly contacting your representative when there's some kind of bill on the table about it is good. Writing letters to the editor when you see a biased or silly article, that also helps. One thing I've been noticing lately in the New York Times is that you'll read an editorial that's sort of got the usual American spin and bias, and then you read the comment section at the reader's comments. And the reader's comments are really savvy. Like, they really seem to understand much better than the pundits what are going on. And, you know, to bridging this divide, I'm not sure, you how to do it exactly, but right now what you have is a lot of people who just sort of vaguely think that this should change, but they're not really organized. Whereas the AIPAC is extremely organized, very streamlined, very to the point. So yeah, education helps. All these kind of things help. I think it's kind of a step-by-step thing.
So my perception is that both sides in this conflict seem to be racing for the moral low ground. And given that the Israelis have the military upper hand, why are the Palestinians not trying to fight for the
High ground.
The high ground?
Yeah.
It seems like if they followed the approach of Gandhi, they have been much more successful.
Yeah. It's easy to say that, and I agree with you. I think they really. I think the violence is not helpful, to say the very, very least. But when you have this situation, and when you have it over decades, and when you have, like, for example, the Oslo Accords in 1993, between the Palestinian Authority and Israel, who said that in the course of 5 years we'll give a little bit more autonomy to the Palestinians and a little more, and then we'll have negotiations, and then there'll be a Palestinian state. The Palestinians were thrilled. They were like, okay, maybe this is really happening. But what happened at the end of 5 years is that the settlement population in the West Bank doubled. And so the Palestinians were thinking, okay, you're not really being serious about this. This is not really good faith. And then the Camp David talks between Yasser Arafat and Ehud Barak, the common American understanding of what happened was Ehud Barak gave Arafat an amazingly generous offer. Arafat walked away and started a terror war. It's much more complicated than this. Arafat wasn't very well prepared, that's for sure. But Barak's offer was such that he demanded a total end of the conflict without really dealing with the main issues. Like, for example, Jerusalem wasn't going to be divided. Or it was, there was like a small suburb called Abu Dis of Jerusalem that was going to be the capital. And refugees' rights completely off the table, not even mentioned. And, Barak said, accept this or this is it. And if Arafat had accepted that, not only would he would have been killed. He would have been assassinated by his own people because it was totally unacceptable for them.
Follow up to that. Are there any leadership that is pushing for that strategic goal, the high moral ground? Looking back at your comments, for India, it took 90 years after the armed revolt from 1857 to 1947. You're talking about 5 years, 10 years, not a small amount of time.
40 years in 67, basically.
So, is there any leadership that is pushing towards that strategic goal of higher moral ground, especially with the increased number of Palestinian population?
Yeah.
They would have much more leverage, like 5 million versus 5 million.
Right. Well, like I say, there's, my boss, Mustafa Barghouthi, he's always been totally for nonviolent resistance, totally against any militarization of the conflict. But he's kind of a Dennis Kucinich, Ralph Nader kind of figure in Palestine because.
I think that is the central theme, right? Can the moderate forces come out and say that amidst this violent leadership?
Sorry, the what?
Violent leadership from Hamas and other military organizations. Can moderate forces come out?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult. They've tried very hard over the years, but the population gets squeezed and squeezed, and then you can't stop every angry young man from doing what he feels. I
think that's the point. Is there leadership to guide? The same problem was there in India, right? There was violent forces.
Oh, okay, yeah. So there actually is a guy named Marwan Barghouthi, who distant cousin to my boss Mustafa, who he's the most popular leader in Palestine actually, but he's currently in jail in Israel, and he's somebody who if and when serious peace talks begin taking place, he's often been called the Palestinian Nelson Mandela, and it's possible. He's so popular. He's got a lot of street credibility, but he's also pretty savvy about the West and about international law and all of this. So he could be a good leadership, but he's in jail, so it's difficult for now. Yeah.
What
opinion of the average Palestinian people towards the United States and the West?
Well, I mean, as you could see from the Snickers and Coca-Cola signs and Heineken, well, not Heineken, it's not American, but I mean, it's certainly not a hateful kind of thing. And I lived there for 2 years. I never hid the fact that I was an American, and people seem not just tolerant but grateful that an American comes and sees for herself, because they can read the New York Times as well as we can, and they can see that the story we're getting is very, very one-sided. So they, and I even brought Israeli and American Jewish friends and tour guided them around the West Bank, and they were warmly welcomed, treated very well, like guests. So, yeah.
What is the Palestinian perspective about the change that happened since 2000 to these days? Like it started in 2000, and I remember a situation that was in the West Bank before that. And how do people there see the change and the...
You mean since the Second Intifada began?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, the settlements all during the Oslo years were expanding, and then they've still been expanding since then. And now the wall is expanding, onto Palestinian land. And I mean, Palestinians are not just angry but heartbroken about this, because they see that what's left of their homeland, like the one place in the world where they feel like they're at home, is being eaten away and being, divided up into cantons. And it's, and not only that, but, all the deaths and all the destruction. So it's they feel pretty bad about it.
Do they see the connection between the war and the terror?
Like I said, they say that if Israel wants to build a wall, it's welcome to build a wall, but they should build it on Israeli land.
Just a couple of remarks about your talk. There was one factual mistake that you said that in '97 Israel overtook part of Hebron, which was actually a result of negotiation between Arafat and Netanyahu.
Yeah, that's true.
And it was seen as huge concession on Netanyahu's part, and you said it was Israel taking over some part of the city, which is...
Yeah, there's a lot of examples of Arafat sort of capitulating to Israeli demands that Palestinians don't see as fair. And Hebron was a prime example of that. I mean, handing over a place where 30,000 people lived, and for the sake of 500 people who under international law shouldn't even be there. The Palestinians didn't see this as any kind of concession. They saw it as a takeover. And they thought Arafat was a fool for agreeing to that. Anyone else?
Picture of the boy by soldiers. You said it's the boy being harassed by soldiers. And actually, harassed was the most frequently used word in the talk, I think. From my personal experience, I don't think it was just meaninglessly harassed by soldiers. I guess he was throwing stones or something.
Yeah, he might have been throwing stones, it's true.
So harassed. Right description for that.
Okay, fair enough. Is that it? Okay, thank you very much.